You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. Welcome to Dolphins Talk Weekly, your one-stop audio breakdown of all of this week's Miami Dolphins news. Now, here is your host, Kevin Dern.
This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly is brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, Caneswear.com. And well, Dolphins, we're back for another episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly. And by the time you listen to this, as I'm recording on a Saturday, March 8th, it'll probably be T-minus 2, maybe even 1 day until free agency starts on March 12th. The new league year kicks off Monday, March 10th. And it's been a minute since I've recorded my last episode. I made a trip to Indianapolis, got to check out a little bit of the combine, talk to some folks there who are in the media in various NFL circles that work for different NFL teams. Got to have dinner with Travis Wingfield, one of my good friends, and obviously you guys know him from the drive time. Basically got to talk all things Dolphins. Also got to meet Kyle Krabs from, I guess, the now defunct 33rd team, but doing the Locked On Dolphins and Locked On NFL Scouting. And, you know, just two genuinely really nice people, Travis and Kyle. So thanks for entertaining me and talking shop about the Dolphins. For those that are new to the show, you can follow me on Twitter at KevinMD4. You can follow Dolphins Talk Weekly on DolphinsTalk.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. And tonight's show, kind of want to make it a little bit of a two-segment show. I'll give you sort of my overarching thoughts as we head into free agency, and I can share some things about players' names that were passed to me of who the Dolphins might be interested into. And then we did this a little bit last year, but we'll run through a mock draft scenario in terms of what I would do if I were the GM of the Miami Dolphins in the draft. But first, we have a whiskey segment. No new whiskey this week. We're back trying to finish off a bottle so I can add a new one to the shelf, but this is the Peerless Rye. It's Kentucky straight rye whiskey. And I think we've had this on the show once or twice before, and I've rated it. Not a huge rye whiskey person. I think this is one of only 2 bottles I've ever owned that's a rye whiskey. Again, you know, the overwhelming kind of flavor I get is red apple. You get some caramel in there too. It's higher proof, 55 proof, 55% proof. But man, it is expensive for the bottle. I think I paid like $107 for it before tax. Just not worth the money. If I'm going to pay for something that's that much and isn't a super high proof, I'd want it to be a little bit more flavorful. And this one, you know, the finish stays with you long. There's a slight like spice burn to it, which I kind of enjoy, but you know, it feels like I just ate a red apple. It's kind of the prevailing feeling with that one. So that's the Peerless Rye. Hopefully, by the time we have our next episode, which I'll aim to do one in probably about a week's time, once we kind of get through the first wave of free agency, hopefully we'll have a new bottle on the shelf that we can break out and unveil. So, free agency for the Dolphins. And I would say I'm going into it with the lens of, it feels like this entire regime, the entire core of players this season for 2025 is essentially going into it on borrowed time. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of guys that last beyond 2025 unless the Dolphins make the playoffs and win at least a game. And I think at bare minimum, if they don't have another winning season this year, Grier and McDaniel will finally be gone. And then I think you would have some serious questions about what to do with Tua Tagovailoa. And the Dolphins have made some interesting moves so far. You know, they've trimmed the fat. They got rid of Raheem Mostert. They got rid of Durham Smythe. They really haven't made any overtures towards a big money free agent like Javon Holland. They've worked with Teron Armstead to get his contract amended to save cap space. They've worked with Bradley Chubb to get his contract amended to save cap space. They've put the right to first refusal, which I guess is a new term or new, tag you can put on a restricted free agent. They did that today with Kader Kohou, which essentially means any team can sign him to an offer sheet the Dolphins have a chance to match as a restricted free agent. There's no draft pick tender because I think Miami's kind of they're pinching pennies here, trying to get Kader Kohou back for less than maybe what his market demand would be. And none of all these things that the Dolphins have done so far this year makes me feel like there's going to be some sort of massive influx of culture change going on. I've been told privately that they expect Tyreek Hill to be with the Dolphins. Maybe that's subject to change once we get further into the season because McDaniel being so specific about Hill's injury at the Combine, talking about how he had wrist surgery for a torn ligament and saying he's going to miss OTAs and minicamp, but he'll be back for training camp. That sounds like a signal flare off to the rest of the league. Hey, come get him. And, oh, by the way, I think he's due like $25+ million this year. 15 of that doesn't kick in until August 31st. But it sounds like the Dolphins are intent on welcoming him back and trying to sort of matchstick and duct tape and chewing gum this culture back together. And unfortunately, Mike McDaniel doesn't have as good a hair as MacGyver did. So I don't know where that's going to leave the Dolphins. And it feels like Bradley Chubb was a player you could have moved on from, in my opinion, should have moved on from, so you're not blocking Chop Robinson's progress and you're kind of setting yourself up nicely for the future. But I do know that Bradley Chubb is one of the more, if not the most popular players in the locker room, a good locker room guy, good culture guy. And to me, that sort of feels like the good culture counterweight to bringing back Tyreek Hill and all the ridiculous antics that come with having Tyreek Hill on your roster. So far, the Dolphins, nothing has surprised me. They're operating, like a team that has a coach and general manager that need to save jobs, a team that needs to win. And kind of one of the sentiments that was expressed to me was that sort of the whole tear down and rebuild that they did in 2019 into 2020, the team kind of viewed that build as being done at 2023. And I guess you could say the high point of that, which I've talked about once here on the show before, was going into that Week 17 game against Baltimore. The Dolphins still had a chance to get to the number 1 seed if they had gone into Baltimore and beaten the Ravens. Obviously, that didn't happen. The Dolphins got smacked, and basically the air in the balloon's been let out ever since at a slow clip. And I guess at this point, my overarching hope is that they get good players. Don't get into the business of adding another high leverage, high dollar contract, because when you really think about it, the guys that the Dolphins have paid that have big money, they're either close to 30 years old or older than 30. So that's guys like Tyreek Hill, that's Teron Armstead before the restructure, that's Bradley Chubb, that's Jaylen Ramsey, or they're injury prone, like Tua Tagovailoa. And it's just, they haven't had much success. Like Jaylen Waddle's about the one guy, and even then, he's been nicked up the past couple years and missed a handful of games in each. He's kind of the one guy that is young and not what I would classify as injury prone. And it sounds like, based on what Cameron Wolfe came out and said this week, that the Dolphins this year are intent on kind of replicating their philosophy from a year ago, which is don't spend a ton of money, use your dollars wisely. And I think with the moves with Armstead and Chubb, the Dolphins currently sit, I think, between $27 and $29 million in cap space available to them as we head into free agency. There's other moves that you could make that would free up more money. Jake Bailey being released, one of them. You could continue to look at restructuring certain guys. You could provide extensions to guys like Jordan Brooks, Jonnu Smith, Zach Sealer, if you wanted. Again, Sealer's 29, Jonnu Smith will be 30 at the start of the season. A lot of their money is tied up in older players. So that's something to keep in mind. And, to their credit, they were pretty successful last year. Jonnu Smith was a really nice addition. Aaron Brewer was a really nice addition. Even though he wasn't in like the initial first 2 or 3 waves of free agency, Calais Campbell was a nice addition. Jordan Brooks was a home run. About the one guy who didn't really cut the mustard that they gave more than a 1-year deal to was Kendall Fuller, who, 2 concussions, a knee injury, a shoulder injury, and now he's gone. And then Odell Beckham was a complete miss, which I think we all kind of had reservations about that from the start. So what I would like to do in this first segment, you have my thoughts on kind of where the team is. I think you need to add good players at a fiscally responsible rate and rate of contract and rate of money before you head into the draft. And I think with the draft, you have 10 picks. You need to add more. You need to get younger in the worst way. And I think that message was conveyed to me by multiple people, both people in the know and then people who work for general NFL sites. Like, the Dolphins have got to get younger. And I keep coming back to this stat. If you look at all 32 teams in the league, the Dolphins have the most snaps played by players in 2024 that are not under contract in 2025. So you've got to replace a lot, even though the majority of the names that you're going to lose in free agency or aren't re-signed yet aren't essentially big names. You've got work to do. So with that, I'll kind of just go position by position in terms of what I've heard in free agency. And again, the disclaimer here is this is not what I, Kevin, would do or not do. These are simply just names that I've gotten through talking to people who know more than I do, that are closer to the team, that are closer to NFL agent circles. So again, I'll let you know whether I would agree or disagree with the player, but from what I've understood, in terms of quarterback, it sounds like Marcus Mariota, and that's been reported by, Barry Jackson, amongst other people. Marcus Mariota seems to be their target. I've never been a fan, didn't like him in the draft. I thought he was overrated. He's never really impressed me much in the NFL. I know, he played a couple decent games for Philadelphia when he was there. He lost the starting job in Atlanta to Desmond Ridder, which I've seen Ridder play a bunch living in Cincinnati. He played at UC. That's not a good sign. to me, Marcus Mariota is a nothing burger. You're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic when it comes to backup quarterback. I guess the positive spin would be he's at least played in RPO systems before, so he's probably going to be able to handle those aspects of it better than your Mike Whites, your Skylar Thompsons, your Jacoby Brissetts. And he can run. He can do some things with his legs that, we really haven't seen Tua do. Ryan Fitzpatrick is probably the best example of a running quarterback I can think of. Led the team in rushing in 2019. That Marcus Mariota doesn't move the needle. And it's unfortunate Andy Dalton had already re-signed with the Panthers. I thought that would have been the route to go. At running back, I've seen people toss around Elijah Mitchell's name just because he was in San Francisco. He's out there. He's available. To me, and running back and receiver kind of fall into the same category here. The Dolphins need to diversify. They've got speed with Devon Achane. They've got speed with Jaylen Wright. They need power. And I don't think Elijah Mitchell fits that bill. At wide receiver, there's one name that's kind of popped up here and there, and that's Josh Palmer, but I don't know if that's legitimate interest or if that's just guys kind of postulating what the Dolphins might look at. I do agree, though, the guys you have under contract, Hill, Waddle, Malik Washington, all of them are 5'10" or shorter. They're all fast, but you need to diversify. You need some sort of big-bodied weapon just to make life easier, especially with Mike McDaniel's propensity to call end zone fades, some of the deep comeback stuff and the corner routes that they throw. It's much easier to get those completed if you have a taller target, and the Dolphins really don't have that. I know Eric Azukama is on the roster. The guy's got, 2 catches in 3 seasons. They didn't give Grant Dubose the exclusive rights free agent tender. He's out there. River Craycraft's a free agent. Braxton Berrios is a free agent coming off injury. You need to add bodies there, preferably one with size. As far as tight end goes, no real names mentioned specifically, but have been told they want to find some sort of blocking tight end to compete with Julian Hill. The offensive line, kind of what everybody's favorite subject is when it comes to the Dolphins. And there's one name here that's been mentioned to me by more than 5 individuals independent of one another. This is the name that's been mentioned to me the most in terms of any free agent or any draft pick that the Dolphins may have interest in, and that is Will Hernandez, the guard from Arizona. Played right guard for them, came out of UTEP, was drafted by the Giants. I think he played both left and right guard in New York, if I'm not mistaken. Short guy, 6'2", but a big guy, 335 or thereabouts. Kind of gives you the idea that you would want some toughness on the interior, some physicality after having to suffer through Liam Eichenberg and Robert Jones a year ago. That's more of a people mover type. I think he's been okay in run blocking. I think he's been pretty good in pass pro. That's an interesting name. There's 3 other offensive linemen that have been mentioned to me, all of which are guards. That would be Daniel Brunskill, who I guess has played tackle in a pinch, but has mostly played center and guard for San Francisco and Tennessee. James Daniels from the Steelers, who was playing really well, but tore his Achilles, so coming off a major injury. And then, I don't know the correct pronunciation of the last name. It's either Freeze or Fries, but I think it's Will Freeze from Indianapolis, the right guard out of Penn State. He's probably the one that would cost the most money, just given his age and his playability, although he too is coming off an injury from last year. Haven't really heard anything about potential offensive tackles. My gut feeling, based on everything that's been discussed with me, is that they would prefer to find a veteran, especially if they get an answer on what Teron Armstead's going to do. I think they are pretty rock solid on having Patrick Paul and Austin Jackson be your left and right tackle, respectively. I don't think they would move either of those guys inside, like say they drafted a tackle in the draft. I think Paul and Jackson would be the starters regardless. And you can hear Chloe, my co-host down here, our pit lab, that rustling around. She's not a fan of the Dolphins' offensive line woes. But no real names have been thrown around, nothing at center. On the defensive line, obviously Bradley Chubb has come back. That was always kind of a 50-50 proposition. I haven't seen the terms on the restructure yet. I think that's probably the key thing is, can you get out of him? Like, that feels like a 1-year rental move with all the incentives you've given him. Defensive line, I know that they are very interested and have reached out to Calais Campbell to see what his thoughts are about coming back. I know there's some interest in re-signing Benito Jones, but that's really been it, as far as names. And just bringing back those two guys is probably not anywhere close to enough in terms of the number of snaps you're going to need to go through next year. I had heard initially there was some interest in Milton Williams, and that dates back all the way to when Vic Fangio was here. But I think Milton Williams' run down the stretch has put him way out of Miami's price range. No real news at linebacker other than they'd be okay with bringing Tyrell Dodson back, but I don't think they would guarantee him a starting spot by any means. Corner, I've heard Shavarius Ward has been kind of rumored. Nate Hobbs from the Raiders has been rumored. And then no real names at safety. Although there seems to be a pretty good market out there this year. Justin Simmons is a free agent. Again, Trayvon Moehrig from the Raiders. Julian Blackmon from Indianapolis. All guys that I would have interest in. I can share, it sounds like Miami's pretty content with letting Javon Holland go out and get whatever he's going to get. I don't think they would match it. So that one feels like another one that's gone, and that's the case of a player where I thought he was tremendous as a rookie when he played in the Brian Flores system. I think out of necessity, the next 2 years he's had to play a lot of middle-of-the-field safety, so a little bit more challenging to make some impact plays there, but I was really disappointed in how he played in Anthony Weaver's system. Far too many business decisions. I think he did okay in coverage, not great, but his play against the run was tragic at times. Outside of the Rams game, you can't really show me a game on film where it's like, okay, I gotta pay this guy. I just don't see it out there. And I've heard some things that have kind of led me to believe that he is one of the culture problems on the defensive side of the ball that Vic Fangio wasn't comfortable with. You obviously have the kick rocks video and all that stuff, and then you have Javon Holland hyping up Vic Fangio during the Super Bowl, which is a bad look, at least for Dolphins fans as far as they're concerned. Just not a lot of good has come out of having Javon Holland back there, especially the past 2 years. So that's kind of where I sit in terms of free agency. My thoughts, I would love to see them get a better backup quarterback option than Marcus Mariota. I think you need to go out and buy at least 2 starting offensive linemen. And this, to me, feels like a proposition that the Dolphins would view more of, hey, these are guys we can afford, versus, hey, these are guys that are really good. But that's a bed they've made for themselves. They've got to lie in it now. The linebacker market, the edge rusher market don't really appeal to me. Defensive tackle, there's moves they could make there that I think would be beneficial, but again, I don't know what they would spend. I think they would be more apt to spend big money on defense at safety and corner, just to ensure you've got at least one smart, savvy veteran in the back end that can kind of quarterback the defense from there. Julian Blackmon is a guy I really liked coming out of Utah. He's played well in Indianapolis. That'd be sort of the name I would circle. But aside from that, I'm just curious to see what they do. So that's the first half of the show. We'll have another sip of our peerless rye. And we'll shift gears here a little bit towards the draft. This is kind of one of the fun segments for me. So we'll run a full 7-round mock draft, and this will give you a scenario of what I would do. Now, the best draft engine in terms of efficiency is Pro Football Network. I disagree a lot with their rankings and their AI in terms of what the computer picks do. So for this draft, we'll just kind of go through, and we won't make any trades, and we'll just play the board as it lies and kind of do a run-through scenario. And then maybe next episode we'll do one where, we won't propose trades, but we can accept trades made to us. So we'll go ahead and start this simulation, and we'll just kind of let the board play till we get to pick 13 with the Dolphins, and we'll take a look at some of the prospects that are on the board. And we are now on the clock. So the best player on the board, according to PFN's rating system, is Tet McMillan, the receiver from Arizona. We've got Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State, Tyler Booker from Alabama, the guard, Jaylen Walker from Georgia, Malachi Starks, the safety, Matthew Golden, James Pierce, Derek Harmon, Nick Eamon-Warry, Jahad Campbell, Jahdae Barron, Siobhan Revel. That's a pretty good host of names that we have there. Will Johnson, the corner from Michigan, was off the board. That'd be a guy I'd be really interested in, although I've heard that privately that there's some rumblings the Dolphins want to play more man and more press, and I don't think Will Johnson fits that. So for me here, there's, 1, 3, 4, 5. There's really 6 names that I would be pretty highly interested in. And those names would be Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State, Jaylen Walker, the linebacker from Georgia, Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia, Nick Eamon-Warry, the safety from South Carolina, Jahad Campbell, the linebacker from Alabama, and Jahdae Barron, the corner from Texas. So I think Miami is probably more apt to sign a starting safety and starting corner in free agency. Although you have to remember that their secondary coach, Brian Duker, was part of the Detroit Lions staff that drafted Brian Branch from the University of Alabama 2 years ago and got him to play really well. So Malachi Starks right there, I would kind of put a check by his name more so than Nick Eamon-Warry, just because I like Starks' tape better. Tyler Warren from Penn State we'll come back to. Jaylen Walker from Georgia is interesting because he's mostly been an edge player who can play some off the ball. That kind of tracks with how Miami's defense is, but I think he would be more of an off-ball linebacker, and I'm not as comfortable with that tape. The wild card name on the board for me would be Derek Harmon, the D tackle from Oregon, but I think this draft is so deep and Miami's so rotation heavy, you can probably wait on a defensive tackle. So for me, it's going to come down to, on defense, Malachi Starks. Jahdae Barron's kind of the same type of player, but more of like a corner nickel. So I think that kind of lessens his value a little bit. Jahad Campbell, as an off-ball linebacker, has some really good tape, and I think you could make him a really nice foil to Jordan Brooks. Came to Alabama as a defensive end, so he's got some pass rush experience. Pretty athletic guy, can do some stuff in coverage, was actually a really good receiver in high school. So I'm very tempted by Jahad Campbell as sort of a temperature changer for the defense. But I'm not entirely sure that Chris Grier would take a linebacker that high. Now, Tyler Warren, the tight end here, I don't think he's a generational athlete the way like Vernon Davis and Brock Bowers have been in terms of their testing. But I think what Tyler Warren gives you is someone who can come in. He can be your inline guy from day one. He can be a tight end 2 for you in terms of pass catching behind Jonnu Smith. Can probably play 700-800 snaps for you as a rookie. You got to remember the Dolphins, once Tua came back from injury last year, so the Arizona game on, played a lot more 12 personnel and were pretty effective in doing it. I think the upshot with Tyler Warren is Jonnu Smith will be 31 going into 2026. So Tyler Warren might have a genuine chance to sort of overtake Jonnu and sort of be the top tight end going into 2026, and maybe he's a 1,000-snap player for you. So you're getting a lot of snaps there. But this is a pretty deep tight end class, and I think the Dolphins will be a little bit hard-pressed to spend the money to find a pair of safeties in free agency. So I'm going to take Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia, even though I tend to like Jahad Campbell as a player better. I think this kind of fits the need and fits what's on the board. So we'll go here to round 2. And I think if you can pair Malachi Starks with someone like a Julian Blackmon or a Trayvon Moehrig, you can make him sort of a chess piece, not necessarily the way that the Ravens use Kyle Hamilton, but maybe similar to how the Detroit Lions used Brian Branch. And I think the safety class is not as deep as maybe defensive tackle and some of the other things. So here we are, pick 48, and this is an interesting one. And again, I don't like the model that PFN uses for their draft engine here. But the main names on the board, we have Walter Nolan, the D tackle from Ole Miss. He should be long gone. Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle from Michigan, or nose tackle, I should say. I would imagine he's gone. Ariante Ursery, the tackle from Minnesota. Jackson Dart. Jonah Savayanea from Arizona. Wyatt Milam. Kind of going on down. This one is an obvious one to me. I think if you can get Kenneth Grant here at 48, you do it. I had heard that they were interested in Tavondre Sweat last year, should he have fallen to 55. So for me right now, you've got a front-level player on your defense in Kenneth Grant. You've got a back-level player in Malachi Starks that you can really improve 2 levels of your defense with right there. So we'll let this wind down to pick number 98. I should have put this on the fast mode. So linebacker, passing on some of those guys there. I have heard internally they like Carson Schlesinger a good deal. He's the linebacker from UCLA who just went off the board at pick 90. So that one might be a little bit tougher for us. So pick 98 on the board here. We've got some interesting stuff. Jared Ivey, the defensive end from Ole Miss, is the top player on the board. To me, that's sort of like if you really want that close side defensive end, the way Emmanuel Ogbah played last year with a little bit of size, that's your guy. But now that you've brought Chubb back, that makes a little bit less sense. I've also, even from the outset, I thought when Anthony Weaver took over, you would see more of the defense to be structured like how it was under Fangio, how it was under Boyer when they acquired Chubb, where it's basically you're running a 4-man front with wide 9 elements. You're giving your defensive ends the option to stand up or put their hand down. You're playing nickel pretty much all the time. So we've got Jared Ivey, Shamar Turner, Josiah Stewart, DJ Giddens, Elijah Arroyo, Jack Besh, Dorian Strong, Terrence Ferguson, Torrey Horton, who is a favorite of mine at receiver. But I think for this exercise, and based on how his combine matches up with the tape, Now, I'll get grief from this for not going Elijah Arroyo. I'm going to go Terrence Ferguson, the tight end from Oregon here at pick 98. So we're through the first 3 rounds, and we've ended up with Malachi Starks, Kenneth Grant, and Terrence Ferguson. Our pick at 115 is coming up. And interestingly enough, Elijah Arroyo is still on the board. He's actually the top player. We've got Joshua Farmer, Billy Bowman, Sebastian Castro, Aranda Gadsden Jr., Bajol Tootin, Logan Brown, Quincy Riley, Jaylen Reed, Darius Alexander, Ollie Gordon. Man, some pretty interesting names. Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma as a linebacker. Interesting names are still on the board all over the place. Man, this one's an interesting one here. I'm very tempted to go after Darius Alexander, and I think that's what I'm going to do. The defensive tackle from Toledo. That gives me someone who can also play in the rotation and probably is a long-term replacement for Zach Sealer as more of a true 3-technique guy and someone who can do some things off the edge. So now we come here to pick 135. And we got lucky here. So Ollie Gordon, a back I know the Dolphins have met with. He's a bigger running back from Oklahoma State. Phil Maffa from Clemson. Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma. Charles Grant, a tackle from William and Mary, who I think is probably going to play guard. We need to develop some offensive linemen, so I'm going to go Charles Grant, the guard from William and Mary, to close out round 4. So we're going into round 5. We're about 10 picks away here. A couple interesting names on the board. Ooh, Luke Kandra, a guard from University of Cincinnati, was a guy I had my eye on. I do like what's on the board, and we've got 2 picks in the 5th round back-to-back. Jamari Caldwell, the nose tackle from Oregon, is the top guy. I would have taken him, but we already have Kenneth Grant. We've got Jeffrey Bassa, the middle linebacker from Oregon, more of a run plugger. J.J. Puigs from Ole Miss. Kamon Rucker, who I really like, a defensive end, outside linebacker type from North Carolina. Damian Martinez from the U. I think with this we're going to go with Jeffrey Bassa because we don't really have another answer at inside linebacker next to Jordan Brooks. I guess in this scenario we'll assume we've gotten Tyrell Dodson back, but I want someone else to be able to compete there. And then here we are at 156. Whew. Man, this is an interesting class. We've built up our trenches. We haven't really hit any of the premium positions. I would hope we've gotten a starting corner at this point because we've kind of let that board slide. Man, oh man. I think right here we'll go with Damian Martinez, the running back from the U. That feels like a good spot to add a big back that can be a power back for us, especially if they're intent on having Devon Achane play a lot more receiver this year. So that gets us through our 5th round selections. Now we've got to wait till the 7th round. So to recap who we have so far, again, no trades. We've got Malachi Starks, the safety from Georgia, at 13. Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle from Michigan, at 48. Terrence Ferguson, the tight end from Oregon, at 98. Darius Alexander, the D tackle from Toledo, at 115. We've bolstered our defensive line. We took Charles Grant, the guard from William and Mary, to develop, hopefully behind some starters we found in free agency. Jeffrey Bassa, kind of a big physical run-stopping back, or linebacker from Oregon. We got a power back in Damian Martinez from the U. So I feel like we've added a good element of toughness. I would have liked to have added a corner. And we are now on the clock. And we're into this stage where there's not a ton of stuff left. Top player on the board is Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, a D tackle from Georgia. Luke Lachey, the tight end from Iowa. Maxon Hook, the safety from Toledo. Jackson Hawes, the tight end from Georgia Tech. Curtis Rourke, cornerback from Indiana. And then Tyler Batty, the defensive end from BYU, our top players on the board. For me, with how this offense needs to work, I'm going to take Jackson Hawes, the tight end from Georgia Tech. And we've at least got two guys now with Hawes and Ferguson that could compete with Julian Hill and maybe try and dump him off the roster a little bit. Pick 233. Still, we've got Ingram Dawkins, Maxon Hook, Curtis Rourke, Thomas Fedone, the tight end from Nebraska, Jamari Harris, corner from Iowa, Brendan Crenshaw-Dixon, the tackle from Florida. Oh, this is our pick here. Dante Thornton, the receiver from Tennessee. He's a taller guy, pretty explosive down the field. That, to me, is worth a flyer in the 7th round. We'll see what we can get. We're coming up. 252 is our next pick. We're at 248. And here we go. And, the name I had my eye on went right before us to Green Bay at 251. That was Cody Simon, the linebacker from Ohio State. I feel like that's a late developmental guy with enough talent to drop someone like Channing Tindall off the roster. So we've got Thomas Fedone, Brendan Crenshaw-Dixon, Trevor Etienne, the running back from Georgia, Craig Woodson, Nick Martin, Ja'Cory Brooks, Baron Sorrell, Max Brosmer, the quarterback from Minnesota. And I think that's where I'm going. You could at least have a developmental guy behind Marcus Mariota and Tyler Huntley if you keep him. We'll go Max Brosmer, the quarterback from Minnesota, to complete our draft. So we'll let this draft finish out. We'll go over the picks. So again, no trades, 10 players. We got Malachi Starks, who's sort of our chess piece in the secondary at safety. Kenneth Grant, our nose tackle, who can also play as a heavy 3 or heavy 2-eye up front. Terrence Ferguson, kind of our Y tight end, was our 3rd round pick from Oregon. Darius Alexander, a 3 technique, 5 technique type from Toledo in round 4. Charles Grant, our developmental offensive lineman from William & Mary. In round 5, we took Jeffrey Bassa and Damian Martinez. Bassa, the linebacker from Oregon, Martinez, the running back from the U. So we've at least got some physicality through the middle of the field there now with Kenneth Grant, Darius Alexander, Damian Martinez, Jeffrey Bassa. 226 in the 7th round, we took Jackson Hawes from Georgia Tech, another blocking tight end that can work in our rotation. And then we took 2 flyers late. Dante Thornton, a receiver from Tennessee, tall, deep threat guy with speed. And then Max Brosmer, the quarterback from Minnesota at 252, just a developmental guy. He can play in camp in the preseason. Maybe you keep him on the practice squad, sort of like Skylar Thompson. Now, looking through this draft, we didn't end up in a spot to get a corner. We passed on Jahdae Barron and Savon Revel at pick 13 to take Malachi Starks. That, to me, feels like something that Chris Grier wouldn't do. It's the only safety he's taken that high is Minkah Fitzpatrick, and then he took Javon Holland as well. Both of those guys ended up playing roles in the slot under Brian Flores, or at least that's what they wanted to do, before they were actually true safeties in this defense. So that one feels like a miss to me there. Maybe they wouldn't take Malachi Starks that high. Definitely a meat and potatoes draft. You don't have an edge rusher. You don't have a corner. You don't have a receiver taken up high. But I think this gives you good players, gives you physicality. It makes you tougher in the middle of the field, which I think the Dolphins are severely lacking at. So no corner, and then no additional linemen kind of fell in the right spots for us. So hopefully they would hit it out of the park in free agency in terms of offensive linemen. But pretty happy with the first 4 picks And then I like Bassa and Martinez a good bit on day 3. But if they can get Starks, Grant, Ferguson, Alexander in the first 4, that's a pretty nice haul. Toughness, physicality, the key there. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly. This will probably air on a Monday as you listen to this. And hopefully the Dolphins will make some savvy moves in free agency. We'll have another episode probably sometime after the first wave of free agency kind of comes and goes, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody. You can listen to the show on DolphinsTalk.com. Be sure to check out all the other readers and shows on DolphinsTalk.com. You can listen to the show on Spotify, iTunes, wherever else you listen to your podcasts. And you can follow me, your host, Kevin Dern, on Twitter at KevinMD4. This episode of Dolphins Talk Weekly was brought to you by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel for the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive in Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com. Caneswear.com.